kind of been asked to talk to you about sheephead since we have a sheephead tournament coming up. I pretty much target sheephead. That's my favorite fish. When I first started fishing for them, hardly anybody fished for sheephead. Now there's a lot of competition for them. People realize they're a good fish to catch, even though they can be difficult. I know that a few people call them striped bandits because they'll steal your bait so quick you didn't even know you had a bite. That's the one thing about sheephead you got to keep in mind. They're very light biters most of the time. It's normally just a little subtle tip on the end of your rod because that sheephead's just sitting there crushing your bait. When I fish for sheephead, I mostly just use sand fleas. That's my go-to bait. But you can't, fiddlers work well just on a hook by itself. Also, I do know that sheephead will eat live shrimp. For this tournament, I can tell you right now the sheephead have moved into the intercoastal and into some of the deeper canals or creeks where there's rock structure. And that's a good place to fish with a live shrimp for the sheephead. You might get a red or black drum too. But that's where, for this tournament, if you have a boat, I'd go there, or you want to go somewhere where there's a structure that will grow barnacles. So a rocky bank, pilings on bridges or docks, all hold sheephead. The main place that I find them on the intercoastal is adjacent to deep water. They seem to like those drop-offs, a rocky drop-off. I personally use a circle hook for sheephead. I use a 1-0. I know there's people that don't believe the sheephead can be hooked on a circle hook, but if you notice the bite, you pull up, you don't jerk, you just lift up. That circle hook will go into them even though they have a hard mouth. A lot of times you get them right in the corner of the mouth. I like the 1-0. You want to use a short leader. So if you're fishing the bottom for sheephead, so you're in 8 to 10 feet of water and you got it sitting right on the bottom close to some structure, use a sliding sinker so you can feel that just little tick bite, but don't use a leader any longer than 10 to 12 inches. 8 inches is even, 6 to 8 is even good because they don't move much. There's times where I'll lift up the rod and that sheephead is just sitting there. And I feel the resistance, and that's him. Some of the biggest ones I've caught, they never bit. They just sat there and sucked on the bait. Plan on fishing for sheephead, bring a lot of bait. You could go through 15, 20 crabs before you hook one. Another trick to use is if you got something to scrape the barnacles on the bridges, it gets a chum slick going and it tracks them and gets them in a feeding frenzy. I've actually seen them chasing each other when I'm bringing one up. So they get very aggressive that way. Another method that I use is if I'm in a boat and I'm fishing straight against like the bumpers of a bridge, I have the weight slid right down to my hook. I have no leader at all. The weight's just sitting there, and then I just position that bait right against the bumper. And then you'll just see this little, or it'll just start pulling down, and that's when they're got it and they're biting on it. There's not a lot I can tell you about sheephead besides that they're my favorite to catch and eat. The limit, of course, now is 8 instead of 15 like it used to be. They got to be 12 inches, and that's not to the fork, that's tail length. Wanted to kind of open it up to any questions people might have about sheephead. Yes?
Like the rig you just showed there, what size weight is that? 1 ounce?
This one is half ounce.
Half ounce.
You want to use the least amount of weight you can to hold it in place.
Are you letting that go all the way down to the bottom, or you're just...
This one's not going to the bottom. This one's suspended
Okay.
about halfway, a quarter way to halfway. A lot of times I'll put it to the bottom and I'll just slowly start bringing it up to figure out what level they're feeding at. Because they're feeding on those barnacles and they're usually at one level. If you see them at the top of the top, you see them, you're not going to get them to bite. Very seldom when I see them do I catch them. They'll just look at the bait and swim away. If there's no current, I've free-lined the bait. Drop a sand flea with no weight at all and just let it slowly sink down and just sit there. And they'll grab it and just start swimming with it. Any other questions people might have? I use a 1/0. I use a 1/0 circle. I use the Eagle Claw Circle C. They're fairly inexpensive hooks. So when you go through a lot of bait, you dull the hooks. Sheephead, you want a very sharp hook. Their mouth is very hard. If you've ever looked in their mouth when you caught one, it's just all those crushers. I have them, and you want your hook fairly stout because I've had them flatten the hook. You'll get a sheephead and it'll crush the hook just flat as a pancake. Or bite it in two, they'll bite the end off. I saw a guy try to lip one like a bass one time and almost crushed his finger. So you want to be kind of careful of that with the sheephead. Even with the circle hook, once in a while they swallow it. I still get them to swallow it because they're sitting there and they're just eating it and not moving at all, and you don't even know they're there. You want to check your bait often because if they're stealing it, you're sitting there with no bait, you're fishing on credit, you're not going to catch anything until you rebait. So be prepared to check that bait off, and go 5 minutes and nothing's bit. Check that bait. Put it back, try a little deeper. Try the next piling. Fishing docks, they're not at this dock, try the next one because they may be there and not at the one you were at. I have the best luck at the bottom and top of the tide. When the current's not moving as strong, especially if you're fishing like Matanzas, you're fishing the bridge, because that current's so strong. The intercoastal, you can catch them off the shore too. You don't have to have a boat. I catch them fishing the rocky shoreline up towards Matanzas. Most of you, if you know along Rattlesnake Island there, it's very rocky. You will lose a lot of tackle. You have to be prepared to lose tackle. But the way I fish that is I use 2 little split shots and a hook and throw it out there. If it gets caught, I break it off, retie and throw out there. So I'll go through 15, 20 rigs in one day, but I'll catch fish there. Because they're there, they're running that right along the drop-off. They're running that rock. Sand fleas work in the intercoastal. Some people have asked about that. Can I catch sheephead in the intercoastal sand fleas? Yes, you can. You can also catch redfish, catch black drum. Yeah, I like to be able to throw so that it's drifting with the current. But a lot of times you're fishing under docks, you want enough weight so it's not going to drift into the next piling and you're snagged. A lot of times between the docks, right in between the poles is where I've found them. On my rod here I have Power Pro, but I have the 30-pound leader just to protect, because you will nick it. You want to check it often, especially if you get a bigger fish and it goes into those pilings, you got to get him back off. So you got to use fairly good drag. Yeah.
What size leader, Tim?
What size leader?
20 pound?
I have 30 pound.
30 pound.
I have 30 pound.
And how long is the leader?
10 inches or less. You don't want a long leader with sheephead. Black drum, whiting, redfish, long leaders work well. Sheephead, they don't. You got that long leader, they're going to take that bait and they're just going to chew on it. You're never even going to know they bit. You'll come up and your hook's empty. Go, I didn't feel nothing. Put it back down there. Come up. What's going on? Am I not putting the bait on there? Because they are good bandits at stealing your bait with a couple of ice jugs and then change out the ice jugs. And I've been able to keep them alive for quite a while that way.
So there's no water in there?
No water. I don't have water. I don't use sand. I don't like using the sand because then you're having to dig them out of the sand. You got the sand all over the place, getting in your reel. Then you got to take it to Mike to clean it for you. So you can keep them alive more than a day. Some people think, but if you have live ones and you set them out in the sun all day, they're goners. They're not going to survive. Another thing, you don't want to play with them a lot. Take out the ones you're going to use in one container so you're not digging in there because you keep getting your hands in there and that kills them too, the oil on your hands. So you got to be real careful. But like Mike says, I don't know if you got sand fleas in there in the store right now. Yeah, so he does. You can buy sand fleas and fiddler crabs and the live shrimp. Same way with the sand fleas. This time of year you go to the beach and you expect to see sand fleas all over the place. You're not going to find them all over. Right now I'm finding them at low tide at the drop-offs. But it's got to be a nice low tide and there's got to be a good drop-off that they're sitting at. Because they're not up high in this cold weather. They're down deeper. Anything else I can tell you about sheephead besides that they like to steal your bait? They're dentist. They do have the teeth. And the bigger ones, their teeth get really big. So they seem to be on the spawn. The ones I caught on the first were males, and they were milking out when I brought them up. And there are some bigger ones. I just talked to somebody who was fishing in the creeks, in the deeper creeks with shrimp, and they said they're catching big sheephead in the creeks right now because they've moved away. They're not at the pier, and they're not in Matanzas Bridge. They've moved intercoastal and into the creeks. And they'll probably still be there when it's the tournament time. On structure. You got to be prepared to get hung up. If you don't get hung up, you're not fishing in sheephead water. If you don't want to lose tackle, don't fish for sheephead. All right, anything else I can tell you? All right.